What would be some of the outcomes? Welcome. I am the only thing between you and happy hour. And it shows. Hopefully it's a worthwhile topic, worth your time. How many of you have been in some of my previous sessions? A few of you. Good. So what I want to do today is talk to you about this emerging role of the information architect. And you're probably here for a few different reasons. The first, you might be an aspiring information architect. Second, you might be a partner of an information architect. Or third, you want to know all about this role so you can avoid them at all costs. Because after all, they are architects. So there is, all joking aside, there is a consistent theme here today. We are dealing with major disruptions. In the keynote, we talked about the dilemma that each one of you will face and how you should be able to solve those. And what we're finding out is that it's really not a technical issue. It's a business issue. Which roles in your organization will be the ones that help shepherd you through this information landscape? One of those roles is the information architect. With the information architect, if there is any consistency, there is inconsistency. We did a survey worldwide, and we wanted to know, who is this information architect? We found 3 variations. The first was a UX web designer. The second was a data-oriented role. The folks that built out the next generation BI system, MDM system. And third was an enterprise planner, one that was building out the information strategy for the organization, how the organization dealt with information risks or how to monetize their information. Now you might be asking, well, Mike, how did each one of these fare out? Well, what we found was about 2% fell into that UX category. And of that 2%, most of those people were here in North America. In Europe and Asia, we saw much less of that. But where it gets interesting is in the data versus strategic roles. And we see a very healthy split. Some are architecting more in a solution architecture capacity, and some are working within an EIM team. The information architects are reporting into the EA team that are focused on a strategy. So I want to provide you a thought-provoking statement, because I've been doing that here across my 4 presentations at this event. If there's a consistent theme, it's every business is an information business. Digital disruptions are solely based on the availability of information and the usage of that information. As an example, how smart would a smart machine be without data? Wouldn't be very smart. How important would Internet of Things be without the ecosystem of information? What we're stating is that information is the lifeblood of your organization. And so, with that, we view information architects as that strategic resource, not as the data resource that's going to architect a specific solution architecture or build an ERD, but the key catalyst that's going to partner with your business enterprise architects to help shepherd your organization into the future. And we see evidence of that today. We predict that of the 5 roles that will transform your business, the information architect is one of those key roles. It's a big weight to put on a role of an information architect that really isn't all that well defined. So hopefully what I'm able to do here for you today is demystify this information architect role, how we see leading organizations implement information architecture. So first, I want to talk to you about why. As a good strategist or architect, we're always always trying to achieve. Why are we here? To what purpose? So in that same light, let's talk about why we want to perform information architecture. Second, we want to understand how leading organizations use information architecture. And lastly, we want to talk about the people component, you. What skills will you need to be an information architect? All this is predicated on information is everywhere. Information is enabling the blurring of the digital and the physical world. 3D printing. You can't have a 3D printer without the design. You can't have an IoT solution without information. It's predicated that the intelligence is there and the information is available. New innovations and new business models. We're seeing an information-driven economy start to spur up, where you've got high-tech companies like Amazon that sell your customer data and monetize that as an additional business model. Or Google. Most people think Google is a technology company. No. Google is a marketing company. All the products and services that they provide, which there's nothing wrong with this, all the products and services they provide, you accept that they can use your information and sell it to retailers. We see this across all industries. Like I stated before, information is going to fuel those next generation smart technologies. Smart technologies that are going to provide recommendations to surgeons. So we see in the government of Singapore where smart machine technology is providing recommendations to surgeons on practices to perform, giving them a level of threshold of confidence on what sort of treatment option for cancer. And lastly, and this is going to strike home for most of you because it's a very real issue today, in that is information is being generated, it's being stored, and it's being used everywhere. It's being pushed to the furthest most edge. When we think of a Fitbit, let's keep it simple. Your health data on your wrist, that data is stored on your wrist. It's being sent across the wire to a platform, to a cloud provider. Could your employer look at that and judge your future health and your employment potential based on that information? Of course. There's opportunities for abuse. So we have to understand and appreciate that, yes, that information is being generated and stored everywhere. And what new business models can we create as a direct result? These are the top 10 strategic trends. At the bottom, at the base, you'll see this concept of intelligence everywhere. Information is the lifeblood of our digital business. The two pillars at the top, merging the real world and physical world. The new IT reality emerges. All is based on information. The software-defined data center is based on an information-driven solution. Web-scale IT, the same. Smart machines, the same. So when we look at this in the wild, and let's double-click here on IoT. As an information architect, looking at the broader picture outside of the technologies, we're looking at the business models. If we were to focus just on that physical asset, that thing, we would treat that differently than a broad ecosystem. We would look at, perhaps we want to monetize on a subscription type of basis at that item level, because that's where we can maximize value. But if we're looking broad at the Internet of Everything, where you've got an ecosystem, then the architecture changes. So for example, the city of Dubai has put sensors in a lot of things in their smart city. And one of the key accolades for the city of Dubai is that water usage They are able to recycle 75% of all water. How are they able to do that? They understand how all the related components fit together, how people use water, where they use it, how they use it, what the outside conditions are in the environment. And dynamically, they are able to adjust how their solutions adapt. Now, we have data scientists telling us that we have so much data that we're struggling to come up with new names. So one particular data scientist coined the term brontobyte. Now, I think of dinosaurs, but apparently this is a lot of data. And as you can see here, the petabyte is all the way here at the bottom. Give you another great example, Ford. On their new fleet of vehicles, their electronic vehicles, 2 terabytes of data is stored on board a vehicle per day. But only a fraction of that information is actually used. So, how can, with the access of all this information, how can it enhance your decision-making processes? What new decisions can you propose that weren't thought of before, challenging your business? How can you prevent these disruptions from impacting your business? We are seeing century-old business models being disrupted. We mentioned automotive. Uber and Tesla are challenging these markets to the degree of, why would I buy a vehicle when I could get an autonomous vehicle and have an extremely low cost? And so when we look at information architecture, we look at it as part of the broader enterprise architecture ecosystem. At the end of the day, without reading the definition, because you guys can read that definition, information architecture is really about providing the blueprint for the organization. What is the company's information assets? How do we evaluate those information assets? Meaning, what's the value? What are the potential risks surrounding those information assets? And how do we build a strategy for how it's used across the company, regardless of specific implementation? So what we find is business architecture, which is representing your business strategy, looking many years out, is prescribing how the information is architected. Now, a subtlety here, you'll see, information architecture is prescribing the technologies and solutions. So if you want to move into an IoT or cloud world, what's going to be your gating factors? Most of the time, it's going to be regulation. It's going to be security. These decisions up front help you figure out what is the fit-for-purpose architecture for your organization. Now, a related discipline is enterprise information management. And there's lots of synergies. We see this centricity, this better together relationship, where business and information architecture inform and enhance an enterprise information management's function. These are 2 disciplines that are focusing on 2 different areas, 2 different outcomes. Information architecture is about creating the blueprint, the design. EIM is about managing that design, governing that design, keeping it evergreen. So, we've talked about why and a little bit of what information architecture is. Let's talk about the 3 facets of information architecture that you need to understand to get that fully rounded picture. The first, and I've gotten this question many times this week, is how would I create a practice? It's not all that different than establishing other practices. More specifically, it's not all that different than creating an EA office either. What you want to do, since this is a business-driven activity, is figure out what is valuable to your business. Don't download the latest framework and click to run, but rather figure out what are the key value drivers. Where is the company going? Focus on that. and tailor and customize your practice to deliver on those promises. So what you'll see here, 3 stages. Figure out where the company's going by targeting. Build the business case. You're a startup. You're going to a venture capitalist for money. You need to have a business case to get their investment in what you're doing. Think of yourselves in that way. Now, what you're able to do based on that is you're able to create a charter. What does this thing look like? How many people do we need? What should their competencies be? What practices should we deploy? How should we integrate with other disciplines? Well, this is all based on those outcomes that you want to achieve and how aggressive you want to achieve them. So it's important we start at that targeting phase, move down into the framing phase, and finally into the planning phase. Now, as an example, you might be wondering, well, Mike, what is a business outcome? Well, business outcome, I've provided a little screenshot here, which might be helpful. It's those tangible, quantifiable, and qualifiable metrics. We need to be precise on the value that we're providing. We're looking for percentages and dollar signs, not broad statements, because we want to be able to deliver on those. So when we think about establishing the practice, the message is fit for purpose. Don't go ivory tower approach, download a bunch of templates, and say, yes, this is going to work for me. You want to make sure that your organization is tailored for what your business wants to accomplish. Second, once you figure out what this thing should look like, you have to set a solid foundation. Some examples of setting that foundation would be an information strategy. Based on where my company wants to go, how should I handle my data? What data is important? What data is not important? How should it flow to my partners? Am I scared of this digital ecosystem? And how should I handle it? So this is directly tied to your business strategy. More specifically, how you want to deliver upon the future business capabilities of your organization. So you're going to see a tight link with business architecture. Second key enabling deliverable here is a business information model. And what that's going to do is it's going to provide you the blueprint for what are the business information entities that are critical to your business. You'll be able to profile those business information entities to figure out how much risk would this element cause on my company, and what is the monetary value of this information asset. Now, it's important that this model be boxes and not lines, and here's why. We're trying to solve what is the company's information, not how. Very similar to capabilities and process. You're going to have many, many different permutations on how you could deploy your information. But to make the decision on all the different directions you could go, we need to have a solid understanding of why do we have the data the way that we have it. That business information model will provide that blueprint. So we can do creative things like data classification, data zoning, to help enable us to figure out, in this new digital economy where data is pushed to the edge, how should we handle it? And lastly, figuring out which information capabilities should we enable. Should we go all in on customer and product MDM? I don't know. Should we do ontology taxonomy? Perhaps. What should the BI capabilities look like? We don't know that until we know where we're going. And that's what we're setting the stage for. Now, lastly, we want to make sure that we're able to make this all actionable. Right? So when we look at building strategies, oftentimes we stop there and we go, okay, we've got a great strategy, we're able to move on. everyone should be able to follow it, right? That's not always the case. To simplify this, we look at this in three major waves. When we think about how to manage our information, architect our information, we need to figure out what are all the different possibilities. Because we know that our digital economy is changing the way we look at business. So the first stage is really about exploration, where we ideate on all the different opportunities that we may be able to monetize. Now, we don't want to just go into a think tank and generate a bunch of ideas. We want to actually pin that to our business model as well. So the next major wave of activities will be around rationalizing those opportunities. So we go from crazy idea to an educated hypothesis. Now, coming out of this, what we want to be able to say is we've got a fully qualified opportunity. How do we do that? Well, we need to make sure we rationalize those business outcomes, tie those opportunities, those ideas to those outcomes. We want to make sure that we balance benefit and risk and create a meaningful plan going forward that is adoptable. And lastly, we've got to tie to execution. So it's about building those meaningful roadmaps that's going to get me there in the future. So what does that look like? Well, these are just examples of the different areas in which information architects will contribute to. This is a team sport. So when we talk about ideation, it's really about getting those proposals of where are those ideas that we really want to chase down. We're going to be building out deliverables like what are the economics around our information. We're going to revisit the market analysis and analyze how could we use this information to enhance our business. Second, once we start to figure out, as far as from an outcome perspective, we want at the end of this phase, what we want to be able to do is we want to say, here's a solid proposal. We've turned this idea, this hypothesis, into a tangible opportunity. So we use things like business scenario analysis. We use business outcome journey maps. We use persona analysis to figure out, based on the business model that I want to enable, what are the experiences that I want to create for my customer base. A great example of this is the coffee business. You've got, as an example, Dunkin' Donuts and Starbucks. Both very successful companies. Both have very different philosophies on how they run their business and how they're successful. One wants a highly transactional relationship, while the other wants you to pay $6 for a cup of coffee. And I can tell you I'm one of the guilty ones. Now, why is this an important distinction? All of their technology solutions are predicated on that experience that they want to foster. So when we look at information architecture, they're going to figure out the areas in which will enhance that business model or detract. Believe it or not, Starbucks has 25% of all the mobile payments traffic today. A coffee shop that sells expensive coffee. That's amazing. Why? Because it's a means to an end. Customer loyalty. What did they have to do? What did that EA team have to do? They had to take a step back and figure out what would be the risks if we went down these paths. When they evaluated those particular opportunities, they went through a very similar type of mental frame here. There's all sorts of things we could do. We could do touchless. We could go to another vendor. We could build our own. But it wasn't until they could build that business case to figure out what was the right solution for them. So what we're doing is we're funneling. We're trying to fail fast. We don't want to be academic about this. We want to get rid of the opportunities that don't make any sense to our business and focus on the ones that are important. The opportunity in risks evaluation is really about, once we understand those qualified opportunities, let's take it to the next level and figure out, based on those highly qualified opportunities, is it worth taking the risk to go do it? This is where we treat our technology and our information no different than how an investment banker would treat their portfolio. I would strongly encourage you to think about your information assets, your technology assets, as investments. Don't think of them as just technologies, but these are investments that your company has made into a particular return. And as we start to think through this, we use those same concepts for figuring out what are ideal solutions to go chase down. So we want to balance, what is my tolerance to risk, and what is the benefit it will bring back to the company? And that's always going to be a balance. And it's our job to provide those options back to our business. Now, lastly, some of the key touch points in the transformation planning is going to be around impact appraisals. So once we're able to take, let's just say, 100 crazy ideas, turn them into 50 opportunities, down to 10 strategic initiatives, now we need to do that option-based planning. So if you remember back to the keynote, and we talked about our job really is about providing viable options. That's what we're doing here. The information architect's able to provide their lens on that particular problem set. Now, some examples here would be an information impact analysis. We did surveys across the UK and Australia, our events, and what we found was these types of deliverables were extremely important to our audience. 90% said that they wanted to do this within the next year, and they weren't doing it today. Why? Because we're able to figure out what's most important to the company. We can look at these capabilities and say, okay, those red boxes, that's what we need to do to succeed as a company. Now, do I want to focus on the entire map? No. I want to focus on those red boxes. Those are the ones that are going to provide the most value back to the company. But that's not enough. We want to put another lens on this. We want to figure out, what does the information landscape look like on top of those strategic capabilities? We want to figure out things like, how beneficial are those business information entities that are supporting those capabilities? Are they mediocre, high benefit, low benefit? We want to understand the risks, the regulatory impacts. One client approached me and said, Mike, I'm reaching out to my business architecture team, and we're going to do this because I'm convinced, based on this model, that our project list is the wrong list, that we're making the wrong decisions. Some areas, they're over-engineering. Some areas are under-engineering. This is able to help you. It's one of many tools that an information architect would use to help distill those types of decisions. Another key deliverable here that we see in this opportunities and risk phase is a business information rationalization matrix. Now, unfortunately, those graphics are very, very hard to see, and that wasn't intentional, by the way. But what we want to understand is, based on the usage and the criticality of the information and its value, how is information used? Not all information capabilities are created equally. So maybe that robust BI real-time analytics solution really only applies to a small part of our business, rather than all of it. Again, dramatically impacting how we spend our money on technology investments. So this is able to tell us which are the transformational information areas versus the ones that really don't matter, that are commoditized. That's the same deliverable, isn't it? That wasn't on purpose. So here, what we're going to want to be able to do is contribute to an opportunity proposal. An opportunity proposal is able to understand, well, based on all those value drivers, based on all those risk drivers, what's the risk-adjusted value of that particular opportunity? And provide that impact appraisal back to your business so they can make an informed decision. So you can build that roadmap. Does that roadmap look like a 10-year roadmap or a 5-year roadmap? It depends. How aggressive does your business want to go on this particular opportunity? Maybe it's not all that critical. Or maybe they don't take the competition as seriously as they should. That's okay. We've given the options and the impacts that would inform them to go one way or the other. So being an information architect, I want to make sure that I communicate that information architects aren't any more important than any other information-based role. This is a better together type of scenario. And in this Venn diagram, what I wanted to be able to articulate to you is it's kind of at this nexus of what does the business need? How do we manage the information? And finally, how we structure the information. It's really about creating that blueprint, that schematic of your enterprise. And so that person's going to be able to think strategically. Behave as if they were a management consultant. It's more about the questions than the solution. Being able to take a holistic view and not just a narrow view. So with other roles where it's more specific on big data or a specific capability, an information architect looks across the landscape. And lastly, they know how to architect the information, integrate with the solution architecture teams. And as an example of this, we all know and love RACIs, right? This is an example of some of the major activities that you would see at this level and what that relationship looks like. And so here at the rationalization of all those business outcomes and the organizational capabilities, they're going to be close partners to those business architects. So they're going to need to make sure that they have the same tools or awareness of those processes. So understanding the value chain, the value streams, the value maps, strategies, business capabilities. They're going to have to understand those aspects along with the information side. Now, understanding the business impact of those capability areas, that's a core competency. And it's not just one, it's about the relationship across the different capabilities. And they're going to want to work directly with business unit professionals to really distill what should those business information entities look like. Now, this isn't an easy job by no stretch of the imagination. This is a very iterative process. And oftentimes, it's one that doesn't happen for, bless you, for multiple years. And here's why. Your business is a car that can't afford to stop. You can't change the tire while the car is still in motion. So the tricky part about this is how do you make these processes organic into the natural processes that your company's already going through today? So oftentimes we see information architects integrate into the corporate and business unit strategy process. Typically, most companies will have an operational planning activity, a 3-year planning strategy type of activity once a year, where they revisit their strategy. Perfect opportunity to plug in. While at other points during the year, they may have to plug into the initiatives, where we're grassroots building some of these deliverables, but we're still thinking strategically. And lastly, we may have to integrate down at the tactical level. There's some business needs, some event has occurred, where we have to think strategically but act tactically. So here's a sample list of some of the activities that you would perform as an information architect. I'm only going to cherry pick a few here. One is focus on the outcomes and the strategy, which we've talked a lot about. But as far as the critical initiatives, it's really about, and these are the three layers we talked about, the strategic, the critical, and the tactical. The critical initiatives, we want to talk about how does this tie back to related business units. When we are in these major projects and initiatives, we want to focus on the key ones, not the ones that don't matter as much. So we're going back to that strategic side, looking at, is this really what's important now for this type of resource? And that goes back to that heat mapping we looked at before, where we saw these are the key capability areas in which are going to enhance our business. Now, as far as specific deliverables, we might have enterprise ontologies and taxonomies that are built. It's a completely valid activity. We might have the integration strategy on how we should architect our information and how it should flow. Should we have complex ontologies and taxonomies? Perhaps, maybe not. Should we build canonical models? Perhaps. Data is a funny thing. It doesn't like to just sit in one place. It likes to move around. So these are two closely related disciplines. And lastly, we want to make sure that our decisions from a security perspective are risk-based and not security-based. That's not to say that security is not important. It is absolutely important. But it's an implementation detail based on the risk that I'm willing to take or not take. So as an action plan, what I would encourage you to do is take a step back when you're looking at your information management practices and look at the research, look at the case studies, look at the relationships that we've defined between these core practices, and challenge the thinking. Ask the difficult questions. Communicate and educate. What new insights have you learned? Where could we benefit in other areas? Over the next 90 days, if this is an area where you want to invest, build that 90-day plan. What would that core team look like? What would that business case look like? Create a set of tangible, highly actionable, quick wins, where we take the high-value, low-risk, low-effort initiatives and really drive out some key successes. Over the course of 12 months, you should be able to demonstrate a catalog of those wins and provide a grassroots community of information architects. Think about how you would be able to do that. What would that look like? I talked to one client today that was doing something similar, building COEs across multiple divisions that were completely disconnected. Challenged with, how do we get these people to talk? Well, there was no commonality. There was nothing to stitch these organizations together. So they weren't incented to talk. Where can we, as information architects, help facilitate that? And lastly, make these processes repeatable and predictable. And that's really about formalizing this within your organization. Highly iterative, fit for purpose. So, like I said, there's lots of resources out there. These are an example of the more impactful ones. So the first one, the hype cycle around enterprise architecture, what we've identified is critical areas strategically where information architecture is critical. In the second, you'll see in a presentation on Thursday, is where this EIM and EIA discipline, how do they intersect? What does that look like? The third is an example of when you're in the middle of one of these initiatives, like a big data initiative, how would you use information architecture? What would be some of the outcomes? How would you collaborate? What would be some of the key concerns? That'll give you tangible examples of what that looks like at an initiative level. And we've got this fourth one, which is the Information Strategy Cookbook. And this is going to provide you, when we are talking about this fluffy strategy, the templatized version of what that should look like. And lastly, even though the title doesn't say it, this is a great article that talks about the relationships between all the information capability framework material, MDM, EIM, and EIA. So it looks at the broad information landscape and distills and demystifies, really, how all these relationships, how they work together, what this better together relationship should be and should look like. So with that, I'll open up to questions. Yes?
So what if you're in an IA-like role and there aren't business architects? So when you have the receipt, what would be the form the business architect would take if that's not formally in the enterprise?
The information architect would have to take on some of those duties.
Okay, and facilitate conversations with the business.
Yes.
To do their part of the R.
Yep. So the question was, if we don't have business architects, but we do have information architects, what do we do? Right? Essentially, how can you create an information strategy if you don't know where your business is going? So you either have to try to justify acquiring those types of people, or bring together multiple folks within the business lines and you facilitate that activity. Other questions? Yes?
How do you think you get over the problem of these information fiefdoms that departments may have built up over the years and their unwillingness to make them a corporate asset?
Sure. We never see that, right? That's an edge case. So a lot of it is a organizational human engineering experiment. It's about having that fact-based conversation. So when we're able to take a step back and look at this business information model and say, this is the blueprint of our information. It just so happens that we've got duplication all around the organization. You're wanting to hug your information like a big teddy bear and won't let go. These are the business impacts. Don't try to fight whether or not that's the right architecture or not. Quantify it in business terms. Well, because you've architected in this way and it doesn't match the rest of the information architecture, we got increased cost and integration. We got to have special solutions. We can't access it when we need it. So there's very real business impacts. Focus on those rather than fighting the battle of, you should let me have access to your information. Does that make sense? Other questions? Stump the analyst. Yes?
Can you talk a little bit more, when you talk about the business information model,
Mm-hmm.
is that related to the business capability model where you have the, where you've got all the capabilities? Are those are different things?
Those are different things. So the business capability model is what your business does. The business information model is what are the information assets that it has or needs to invest in. And remember, we want to create these things less in a current state view, but more in a future state view. Because those decisions in current state have already happened. We want to focus on what are the key deliverables that are going to help enable us for those future strategic goals. Does that make sense?
Yes.
Okay. Other questions? Come on, there's some out there. No? All right. It's happy hour. Thank you, everybody, for your time. I appreciate it. Have a good rest of your conference.